Our next session is going to pivot to sustainability from the consumer perspective and to one of our most highly anticipated research releases of the year, the Sustainable Market Share Index. To share the research results is Randi Kronthal-Sacco, Senior Scholar at NYU Stern and pioneer of the index. Randi has over 25 years of packaged goods experience, including 18 as a senior executive at Johnson & Johnson, and is also a proud Stern alumna. So welcome, Randi.
Thank you. I do need a clicker. Okay, I'm delighted to be here to share the 2022 Sustainable Market Share Index. When I started here 6 years ago, I asked the question that every classically trained marketer would ask, or really any good business person, which is how are sustainable products performing in the marketplace? What's their share and how are they growing? And what we found is there really surprisingly was no data. As Tansi mentioned earlier, there was lots of data in terms of survey and consumers' intention to purchase, but not actual purchases. And with that question, we launched our seminal study and have been tracking consumer purchases of sustainable products ever since. To do this analysis, we partnered with IRI. And for those of you who don't know IRI, just a brief primer, they receive all transaction data. Anytime you scan a product in a food store, a drugstore, a mass merchandiser, dollar store, et cetera, all those scanned items in what's called the consumer packaged goods industry goes to IRI, and they generously donated that data to us. We now have 10 years of data in that category. And we delineate we look at over 250,000 products every year and put them into two buckets, either sustainably marketed, so the brands are making claims on the pack that suggest it's more sustainable than other alternatives, or conventionally marketed, meaning no claims on pack. The one thing that I will mention is that private label or store brand comes into us as an aggregate. We know retailers have goods, some retailers like Whole Foods 365 have offerings that are sustainable, but because it comes in as an aggregate, we don't see the delineation, and we need to put that into conventional products or non-sustainable products just to be conservative as an academic institution. So for sure we are depressing what the actual performance is because we don't include private label in our aggregate of sustainable products. So every year we contemplate what we're going to put out this year, and we really think about what the most pressing question of the year is and what's come into the center. And by far, the most pressing question that came in this year is how are sustainable products doing in a year of extra high inflation? And with that in mind, we have our question. Sorry, that's a different thing. How have sustainable products fared in the face of inflation and over time? Second question, which is really linked to that we'll be answering today, is what is the price premium of sustainable products versus conventionally marketed products in 2022, again in a year of inflation? And then third, I'm just so excited to share this. This is a sneak preview for audience members only of yet to be published work around something we've contemplated, which is, or thought about for some time, which is what is the brand loyalty of sustainable products? Are consumers more loyal to sustainable products than conventional products? And we're hoping to report on that today as well. So let's turn to the first question. How have sustainable products fared in the face of inflation and over time? So Tansi shared this chart earlier. Year on year on year, sustainable products share has grown of the market. So from 13.7 when we first looked at it up to 17% last year. Survived and thrived during the pandemic. And in 2022, I'm just delighted to report that we saw share increases again, another 0.3 of a share point in the face of inflation. And this is stunning. I want to show you something else, which is if you look to the left of the chart, this is the private label that I was talking about, or retailer store brand. Retailer store brand has kind of hovered around 17.1 to 17.3% share of the category for the last 5 or 6 years. But with inflation and consumers pressed on the money that they're spending, it grew to 18%. So private label grew to 18%, 0.7 of a share point. Sustainable products grew 0.3 of a share point, which suggests that sustainable products are more insulated from pricing actions around inflation than branded conventional products, because you have the private labels growing, you have the sustainable products growing, so the ones that are losing are the non-sustainable branded players. Turning our attention to the growth over the past 5 years, sustainably marketed products grew almost 2 times faster than conventionally marketed products. Look at the CAGRs, the category annual growth rates for the last 5 years. Year on year on year, sustainably marketed products are delivering about 9.43%. Conventionally marketed products 5-year CAGRs 4.98%. Actually behind what the category is 5.68. So sustainably marketed products are really outperforming conventionally marketed products and the category as a whole. The other thing we look at is over the last 10 years, we had history and now we have current data. Over the last 10 years, as CPG or consumer packaged goods has grown, how much has sustainably marketed products contributed to the growth? Well, this year we're reporting that 30% of the growth is coming from sustainably marketed products over the past 10 years. And typically what you would see is the share of market, 17%, equals share of growth, 17%. But in fact, it was 30%. So to use a sports analogy that I'm not terribly comfortable with, but punching above its weight class. So disproportionately delivering growth to the category. So let's look at where the category, let's look at these 36 categories which we looked at. So we looked everything we looked at 36 categories, which accounted for about 40% of all US volume. And we always bucket it into 3 groups in terms of development, in terms of index. So in the far right, you see all the categories where share of sustainable products exceeds 20% of their respective categories. And conversely, to the far left, it's less than 5%, so lower share categories. We had opined when we first issued our first report that regardless of where they started, everything would be moving to the right. And I think my arrow moved before I did, but that was supposed to move. I'm very pleased with my animation. So they're all moving to the right. And you see that in 2 different ways also. The arrows that you see at the bottom, not my big green happy arrow, but the arrows that you see in the bottom show where we looked at the performance of those categories of sustainable products when we first looked at it and what they are now. And you see lots of arrows going up and increasing share. The other way that you can see this relative movement to more sustainable performance is the number of categories that are in green. And those categories move from one bucket to another bucket. To illustrate, when we first looked at this 6 years ago, we had in the 20% and above category, only 6 categories were represented there. Now we have 13. And conversely, when we first started, there were 14 categories in the lowest share bucket, and now it's only 9. So clearly there's a movement to suggest that consumers are absolutely buying sustainable products, and it's becoming more and more important. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to the second question. We looked at the growth so far, and we saw that it was disproportionate to where it should be and to conventionally marketed products. What is the price premium of sustainably marketed products? Bit of background. When we first looked at this and looked at 2014 data, we saw that sustainably marketed products had a 34% price premium over conventionally marketed products. Not surprisingly, everybody knows sustainably marketed products are more expensive. What was interesting to us, again background, is that by 2018, the gap between sustainably marketed products and conventionally marketed products, the price premium increased rather than decreased, which was sort of contrary to what we thought, that as supply chains became more efficient, we would see a contraction between those two segments. But what happens here is that in a non-inflationary environment, manufacturers aren't able to increase the price of their products that exist on the shelf. You need to justify these price increases to the retailers. They're not going to just say, oh, you want to make more money, Nestle, and I'm not using Nestle just as illustratively. You need to make more money, so we'll take a price increase. No, you need to justify it. And in a non-inflationary environment, no externalities, non-supply chain challenged environment, there was no increase in price on these legacy, historically conventional products. So the way the manufacturers increase their profit margin is with the introduction of new products at higher prices. Tansy brought up this morning that last year's report unveiled that 1 out of every 2 new products now adopts a sustainability benefit. And with those new product introductions, you also have higher prices, and that is justification for the increase in the premium. But then externalities hit, and you've got the pandemic, and you've got inflation, and you see the contraction or the reduction in the gap between sustainably marketed price premium and conventionally marketed price premium, with 2022, this year, or last year, as a 27.6% differential. So to illustrate that point, let's look at year-on-year price increases of those aggregates. And the way you should read this is in 2019, conventional products saw a 3.26% increase versus 2018, and sustainable products saw a 3.73% increase versus 2018. So had we reported 2019, you would have seen the gap go even more further. But then 2020 and the externalities start hitting, and you see this is the conventionally marketed products pricing outpace that of the sustainably marketed products, so it reverses. And let's look at what happened in 2022, where conventionally marketed products, the bulk of the business out in the marketplace, had a year-to-year price increase of 17.8%. compared to sustainably marketed products at less than 10%. So that's why you're seeing it sort of settle at about 27.6% differential between sustainably marketed and conventionally marketed. It's not that the sustainable products saw price rollback, they just were not taking as aggressive a price increase. Have they been happy with their results? Well, let's look at the headlines from fourth quarter of this past year. PepsiCo revenue rises as higher prices lift business. Coca-Cola revenue rises as fueled by higher prices. Kellogg's earnings top view. So these are excellent results for these predominantly conventional players. But you also see in here some discussion about volume weaknesses. So while they're taking price, they're seeing less volume or units moved on shelf. And so we expect that we probably will stay about a 27% differential rather than go further, because they're not going to these businesses are less elastic, and so they're not going to want to see the difference change. And look at so I predict it will stay at 27%, and look at what Walmart just issued this past year. Walmart issued on February 10th a warning that major packaged good makers can no longer take price. Walmart, which is the world's biggest retailer, can no longer stomach price increases. And they're going to pitch their own private label or store brand as a very fine alternative to other branded players. So my guess is that these usurious, very big price increases will stop and will sort of settle at a 27% differential. Okay, so we saw how well sustainable products did in terms of share. We saw how well disproportionate growth. We see the price premium difference. Now for the sneak preview of something we pondered: are consumers loyal to sustainable products? This work has been led by Professor Brian Bollinger, who's here with me today. a colleague of mine, and as well as a PhD student out of Duke, Levin Zhu, who was a visiting research affiliate scholar here as well. We have found, we did a deep dive into 4 categories that you see here, and we do find that that sustainable products have greater purchase stickiness than non-sustainable. So the way you would read this is that if a consumer purchases, let's look at frozen entrees for discussion. If a consumer purchases a sustainable product, they're 6.7% more likely to purchase that sustainable product again, or they will purchase that sustainable product again. Conversely, if a consumer purchases a non-sustainable product, they're only 0.7% more likely to buy a non-sustainable product again. Now, Professor Bollinger will tell me I need to say that we didn't see it in brand loyalty, so they weren't necessarily buying the same brand. What they were buying was the sustainability benefits. So what that says to me is that if for marketers and retailers, if you are not introducing these sustainability benefits to these consumers, you're not even in the consideration set for them. So big opportunity for manufacturers and retailers. And I think one of the reasons we're not necessarily seeing the same brand loyalty as much as sustainability loyalty is because, as we discussed, many of these brands are new and they're building their brand equity. So my guess is this will change over time, but we'll continue to report out on that. So in summary, shares of sustainable products continue to grow. Now it's 17.3%. It's growing 2 times faster than conventionally marketed products. While the sustainably marketed products still enjoy a very lovely premium of 27.6% versus their conventional counterpart, the differential has narrowed as conventional products have taken very large price increases, particularly in this past year. And then finally, consumers who purchase a sustainable product have a higher propensity to buy another sustainable product than a non-sustainable one. I do want to acknowledge, thank you for listening to the report. I do want to acknowledge my colleagues at IRI, in particular Joan Driggs, and my team that's listed here. And with that, I would love to call up Nishat Mehta. Now, Nishat informed me last week that even though I have literally seeded the name IRI in this discussion no fewer than 6 times, last week the name changed. So IRI is now Circana, and it's Circana because they've merged with MPD, another wonderful research house that looks at categories outside of CPG. So they look at general merchandising categories, which means to me that I hope to be reporting in other non-CPG categories shortly. And may I invite you up? Okay, so first and foremost, I want to thank you so much for this wonderful partnership. You have helped us prove that sustainable business is good business, so thank you.
Absolutely. No, we happen to have some good data. We should be doing good things with it.
Wonderful. So you and I spoke probably about a year and a half ago. We both had the same goal, which was to understand whether brands should take a portion of their advertising budget to spend against sustainability, and whether that advertising would drive purchase. And you have a methodology to see consumer purchase responsiveness to advertising. Can you elaborate a bit on the methodology?
Yeah, sure. I don't want to bore anyone, but I think it is important to just sort of appreciate the sort of rigor of the approach that we take. So we capture quite a bit of loyalty card data. We anonymize it. We attach it to a sort of a de-identified ID to just obviously live within the privacy guidelines. But we also then work with a whole host of media partners. So everyone from kind of the ad tech ecosystem, some of you have heard of companies like The Trade Desk, to all the major ad platforms, Mehta, Google, et cetera. And we also bring in the exposure data, so they can help us understand individuals that were exposed to certain pieces of advertising, and we merge that data set together. So we then have, for any given period of a campaign, the people that bought the product, people that didn't buy the product, what their historical purchase behavior looked like, and what advertising they were actually exposed to. And so we're able to use that to identify control versus exposed, and then run that across hundreds of thousands or millions of households that are exposed to an advertising campaign, and identify not just sort of top-line sales lift, this campaign drove X% sales lift, but then at the individual tactic level. So this piece of creative was better than that piece of creative. The optimal frequency band was 5 to 8. Any less than that wasn't enough to convince someone to buy. Any more than that was overkill, and you either annoyed a customer or it was just a wasted impression because 8 was enough. You didn't need the 9th one. And so that analysis allows us to get to a pretty low level of granularity in terms of what aspects of an ad campaign are actually driving incremental sales. Not, especially in the consumer goods category, let's face it, we all buy things because we're at the grocery store and we ran out. It may have nothing to do with the fact that I saw an ad for that product last Tuesday. What we really want to focus on is what is incrementally being bought as a result of the advertising that I was exposed to.
Thank you. So we were interested in seeing, we were interested.
Is that any better? Or?
Does he need to repeat the whole thing again? You and I were both interested in maybe producing something of a mega analysis with sustainable brands focused on environmental sustainability advertising and whether consumers who saw environmental sustainability advertising actually purchased the product. You will get another sneak peek because we are revealing only a few brands today.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay, perfect. So this one's actually really interesting to me. To Randy's point, this is something I'm quite passionate about. We own or we license quite a bit of data, and how do we use that data to start institutionalizing things that are good, right? If we can convince companies that things that are good for us are good for the bottom line, that's the way that you institutionalize things. And so we've begun a set of studies around measuring the performance of campaigns that specifically call out their sustainability attributes, right? Sustainable marketed products. Admittedly, we've only done a handful of campaigns. We've only measured a handful of campaigns. For any brand marketers that are in the room, please come up to me later if you're interested in adding to our sort of corpus. But in the campaigns that we have measured, a few things come out. So first of all, campaign lift, top line lift, is lower than our benchmark. I get that that's a bit of a downer for this audience. It is positive, but it is lower than our benchmark. Not surprising, given the fact that what you just saw up here, these products are priced higher. And in the CPG space, price is a very important attribute about the product. So the fact that there is positive lift is actually still quite surprising, again, for products that carry a price premium. I think as you dig deeper, there are a number of things that are really interesting to us. So first is, these products are really exciting to new buyers, customer acquisition. So what we found is the majority of the lift actually came from buyers that buy in the category but were new to the brand, or they're in fact brand new to the category. That's almost unheard of. In our space, always, campaigns lift is driven by the existing buyers buying more of the product, capturing headroom in an existing household rather than actually acquiring new customers. The sub-bullet underneath that is the time between first exposure and purchase. More than 50% bought within the first week, which, by show of hands, how many of you have watched a TV commercial and, turn off the TV, go straight to the grocery store, we got to buy this product? Doesn't happen very often, right? So to see that level of engagement and excitement over an ad is not normal. So that's the first thing, is the sort of level of acquisition and excitement over buying a new brand. I think the second thing, not surprisingly, is that buyers tend to skew younger. We saw that with the brands that we measured, that if you looked at the brands themselves and how the ages of their buyers were represented, the buyers that represented the lift in these campaigns tended to skew to the younger fringes of those age ranges. Again, not surprising, but proving a point that's probably fairly straightforward. And then the last was, it's probably sort of considered normal for us to think of there being kind of one general green buyer. And I think what we found is, in fact, there is a kind of a continuum of sort of, green starters, if you will, people that are new to sustainability versus sort of green matures. And what we found is that in these couple of campaigns, the green matures were actually the ones that delivered most of the lift. So sustainability marketing seems to work with people that are already kind of conditioned to look for things like that. And that was an interesting insight that we learned from this.
Yeah, I was delighted with any sales lift in this case because both the campaigns happened to be for brands that were in the bottom part of the less than 5% share of category. So the fact that consumers do want to hear about sustainability in categories that aren't historically thought of as sustainable is really encouraging. And for marketers bringing in new audience, bring the younger user as a future consumer, I think it is telling and directional. Yeah. Let me pivot, because I see the clock. Let me pivot to social sustainability. I know you've done some work in terms, because we're focused on environmental, I know you've already done some work in terms of DE&I, and I'd love you to share with the group what.
Yeah, some of you may or may not have heard of, so the advertisers, the Association of National Advertisers, the ANA, has a program called See Her, which is intended to focus on ad creative and the proper representation of women and girls in advertising. So we partnered with them. They created a score, the way in which you can score a 30-second video, a 30-second TV spot on its representation of women and girls, accurate representation. And so a higher score, it's called a GEM score, a gender equality measure. A higher GEM score represents that the ad creative actually had a more accurate representation. A lower GEM score meaning a worse or a less accurate representation. What we found was pieces of creative that had a higher GEM score actually generated 5 times the lift for the campaigns that they powered, which is significant, obviously. We also noticed a handful of other things. One, if the ad campaign is actually inside of a piece of content, a TV show, that also has a high GEM score, because content was also scored in addition to the advertising, that there was an increased 2x multiplicative lift, meaning the 5x became 10x for campaigns where the ad creative actually matched the GEM score of the content in which it was shown. And then lastly, amongst underrepresented or less represented minorities, Hispanics showed a 40% lift. Black households showed an 80% lift versus the average campaign, which was about 12%. So again, significant improvements when the ad creative actually appeals to the people that are buying the product. Go figure. But again, that's a perfect example of a situation where we think the data actually shows that doing good is good for the bottom line as well. And we hope that's more takeaway from that.
That work is available. We can put it on our website for distribution as well. We have a minute left. Can you, in 20 seconds, what's the future look like for advertising?
I think there's a handful of things here. Probably the biggest thing for me is reminding ourselves that advertising is intended to be delivered to people that will appreciate it. So as we think about advertising in markets where virality is possible, right? Social media gives us the opportunity to have your message go viral. Social messages tend to go viral more than non-social messages. So take advantage of that. You don't have to pay for every advertising impression, but place your impressions that are socially minded in the right channels that will ultimately allow others to boost that message for you. And that applies not just to social media, but as you're thinking about, for the CPG folks that might be in the room, the retailers that you work with advertise social messages with the Whole Foods and the Sprouts more so than you might with the Walmarts and others. In the same way, you're directing your media at the people that actually matter to you.
Great, thank you. Do we have time for one question?
We would love to. Yeah, we're going to give you 5 minutes for questions.
Oh,
I'm sure people have lots to say.
Fantastic. Okay. Do you want somebody else? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Divya?
Hello. Oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Do you want to go ahead?
Oh, there's two, I guess two.
The mics are on when you receive them, so.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Sorry. Mark Tanous with Silverleaf Partners, ESG Practice Group. So my question is, do you all differentiate at all between those products that have been sort of third-party verified, like, for example, organic versus just natural label? And is there data about how consumers respond to, or can they tell the difference, and are they telling the difference between stuff that is certified versus just the change in labeling?
I think we both can answer that.
Yeah.
Why don't you just...
Sure. So we actually looked at some data specifically around marketing claims and then things like B Corp. And interestingly enough, what we found in the last year, going versus 3 and 5 year CAGRs, the products that have outperformed are actually those that are, so B Corp products did extremely well off of a relatively small base. What we're finding is those that are certified as being, sort of the attributes that are good for the world outperformed than the products for which attributes were good for you. So things like organic, GMO-free, things like that did well. The things that really outperformed were recyclable packaging, B Corp, humane, vegetarian fed, cage free, things that are less about what I put in my body and more about doing what's good for the world. So again, where we can get certifications, we do. Where we can't, we do our best to sort of take the marketing claims, but it does feel like people do seem to care about the certification. Again, B Corp being a perfect example of that.
And we see very similar data.
Thank you. I have a question. So when you were talking about, sorry, I'm losing my voice, the breakdowns and how sustainable brands are moving up while conventional brands are staying down. Earlier panels were talking about the backlash against ESG and sustainability and red states and blue states. Have you done a dive into red states and blue states? Because it seems to me there could be a message that if people in red states are buying those products, then maybe there's a deeper message that we're not looking at, and politicians are missing that. Does that make sense?
Yes. We have done some work on red states and blue states. I did it with Brian Professor Bollinger led the work. And it was interesting, correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, that in red states, actually sustainable products did really well because there wasn't a ton of availability. And so consumers who wanted to buy them really wanted to buy them. So I think there is an opportunity for there to be general availability of all these sustainably marketed products. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, but I was also thinking, can we use that narrative and that story to try to push away the whole narrative against sustainability? Because those communities actually want what's good for the planet and what's good for their communities.
Yeah, we try to disseminate all our work. We do just examine and analyze, but we do many speaking engagements to hopefully move that agenda forward.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I work for a nonprofit called Global Citizen. I'm curious how products that have a give back, I feel like in the past 15 years, that became a large trend where a product might be paired to a donation to a nonprofit, or it might be a one-for-one product give. Have you done any research on how those have done kind of since they've come on the market? And would you consider those a sustainable product?
Yeah, we did not contemplate or put into our sustainable category give backs if that was the only reason that the product was sustainable. We really focused on the contents of the product itself, much more so than any social campaign in terms of give back or to a charity. So it was not included in our That's not to say there weren't sustainable products that also gave back, but if that was the only benefit, we did not include that in our aggregate.
Do you think there's a future in those?
I would have to get back to you. Maybe the question that's asked most pressingly this year.
We have time for one more question.
And both Nishat and I are going to be here during the break, so please feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, so over time, a product can be a conventional product and then become sustainable if, like, the packaging's changed. So I could be a consumer of that product and I remain. So do you model in, like, looking at, like, shelf space and, like, the changes in the product, not the change in consumer behavior?
Yeah, so first I do need to clarify that if we did not look at the packaging itself. There's too many claims on packaging. The little bit of time we've looked at it, the packaging itself doesn't appear to drive purchase, although we're going to continue to look at it, particularly as it relates to plastic. So we're talking about the contents. What we are seeing is a wholesale change on many categories from what we would call historically conventional to sustainable over time. And most notably, we see it in the dairy category, in milk, yogurt, and cheese, and personal care. So no phthalates, no phosphates, clean beauty has really made a massive change. And just 2 years ago, I reported that high-end products like retinoids weren't including sustainable benefits because they thought the active was sufficient. No longer. This year, when I reported, even the high-end products are starting to adopt clean beauty because it's almost table stakes. And my hope is that continuing to discuss this, we'll have more and more categories changing to more sustainable benefits. Because the way we move from 17% to 70% has to be with the legacy products changing. Just can't do it with small products.
One other just quick thought on that. In the GEM analysis around women and children, or women and girls, we had done some work that compared different pieces of creative that had different GEM scores, and we want to do the same thing here. That there's different pieces of creative, one that touts the sustainability claim and one that doesn't for the exact same product, and be able to show what difference there might be between one or the other. So again, love to talk to any brand marketers in the room that are willing to help us with this study.
Yeah, it's a pro bono study.
Yeah, exactly.
Please.
Exactly.
All right, so stay for coffee break and happy hour to get these two into conversation. Thank you so much.